What's going on, guys? Coach Jeremiah here. I want to take a few minutes real quick to go over kind of my thoughts or my coaching mindset for core and hip position during a hinge, right? So think a deadlift or the initial movement on a squat. There's certain ways that we need to brace our core and move our hips and everything so that we are strong and tight in those positions, especially under load. Once we throw a bar on our back or try to pick one up off the floor. Now, if we're gonna get technical with it, we're looking at anterior and posterior pelvic tilt. That's really the underlying factor behind all this. I threw this diagram up on a wall to kind of talk people through this, especially whenever they come in new. Ignore my sweet drawings right now. We'll get to that in a minute. But I could say anterior, posterior pelvic tilt, erector spinae, iliopsoas, all this stuff all day. It's not going to necessarily be received by a client. And so a way that I like to break that down is that when we're loading up for a hinge, and I'll throw in an extra video like up here that'll kind of demonstrate that, we want, what I like to tell people is that we're imagining that your ribs and your pelvis are cylinders, okay? So think like a can of soup. And they're a can of soup stacked on top of a can of soup. And we want those cans, those cylinders, to be in alignment, right? So the top one is aligned directly over top of the bottom one. Now, that's where my little drawings come in here, because what I see so often, especially with new clients, these crack me up just to look at them, is we get one of two things, or both of them. One is that as we drop down into our hinge, so this is a guy, drawn anatomically correct, of course. This is a guy going in for an RDL or a hip hinge and not engaging his core or using his hips to hinge. He's instead kind of rounding over in his mid to low back and stretching out those back muscles to come down, not engaging these muscles on the backside here that we want him to be using. Just the same on the other side of that, as he comes back up, what I see so often is that people squeeze with their low back and they arch and they pull back like this rather than driving their hips forward and engaging their hamstrings and glutes as the primary movers of that hinge. And so, again, I use the cylinders vertically aligned concept to try to explain this. And I did it with a client last night. I think it kind of helped. And so I figured I'd throw the video together for you guys. Hopefully I'm not shaking too much. My arm is definitely getting tired holding this thing up. But what are we talking about with this vertical alignment? The guys over here on the right are our correct demonstrations of that, where we have this guy here with his ribs aligned directly over top of his hips. I'll try to kind of draw this stuff in. Obviously it's not perfect, but we have this vertical alignment here. That'd be where his spine is. And then his abdominals, or what we call his core, I guess we're gonna get loose with our terminology, is right here. Now this red, he has muscles that surround this midsection between our ribs and our hips. That's where your abs are, what we would call your rectus abdominis, the six-pack muscles. He has these ones that kind of transversely cross over his midsection, or interestingly enough, called his transverse abdominis. And then his low back muscles, his erectors, everything like that. Still working, not what we want to be the primary movers. Something that is a primary mover here, though, are gonna be his glute muscles, which I drew perfectly there. So, butt muscles, he's doing it right. So he's got a nice shelf of a booty that he's building. This is where we want that movement to come from. And as he comes up to that top position, he's locked in. He drove through with his hips. He's squeezing his butt, squeezing his hamstrings. That's where his movement's coming from. Just the same, as he hinges, he has all of this locked in. He's strong through his abdominals, his transverse, everything like that. That's where I always talk about taking the big deep breath, breathing down in your belly, squeezing that tight. We're creating all this intra-abdominal pressure and tension that's allowing us to load our spine without minimized chance of injury, that is. Now, going back to our incorrect guys and kind of to our diagram up here, there's certain muscles that we want doing certain things whenever we go through these movements. And so this guy right here, he's stretching out those low back muscles. They're flat. You can see these guys over here, they're kind of bumpy. The bumps are drawn to show in muscular contraction. the straight lines are drawn to show muscular relaxation that we don't want necessarily. So low back, rounding over, this muscle's on tension as he reaches down, and then he's coming back up, he's arching it. Now he's using these muscles, right? These muscles are the ones that are tightened down now, but we're creating tension and pain in here in those lumbar vertebrae. I probably just angled up away from everything there. So we're creating all this tension and pain back here, and we're going into this what we call anterior pelvic tilt, where his hips are rounded forward, which is putting all this tension on his lumbar spine and creating pain and discomfort in there. At the same time, what we normally see with that is that the hip flexors, these muscles that pull down on the front side of the hips, are getting super tight because we're always in this butt out Instagram girl position. And when we do that, which I demonstrated here, our abdominal muscles that we are supposed to be using to create tension and strength in that midsection are all stretched out and loose, and they're not being engaged the way we want them to. So when we get into this anterior pelvic tilt position, I should have drawn this with this cylinder here tilted forward, because again, it's putting more of that pressure on that low back. But the rib flare is the one that I see the most whenever I'm doing RDL. So people who are pulling up to the top, I'm holding over the camera here, they pull up to the top, they flare their ribs out. We can see the ribs through their shirt, and you can't see, but I have this big arch in my low back. That's what we have here. So we're trying to avoid that. So how do we do that? When we set up for our RDL, we're standing upright. We have tension in our upper back so that we're able to not fall forward in the shoulders, because then we kind of see this. We see this tilt forward, which what does that do? That creates this, right? We lose our tension in the low back and our abdominals, and it pulls those shoulders, everything forward, bad. Technical terms. And so we are engaged in the upper back. We are set with our bar or our weight in front of our hips. It's right against our legs, and our knees are loose. They're just relaxed. I didn't address the knees too much in here. That's a subject for a different video. But once we have that position, we get our big deep breath. I'm breathing down into my belly to bring as much air and pressure down into here as I can. Now I'm gonna latch down and lock in on my abs. Now that midsection is strong and tight, and I can push my hips back. I'm sticking my butt back and out so that I'm creating that tension in the hamstrings down here, the hamstrings and glutes where we want this tension, making these muscles work to pull me back up into this position where I'm erect, squeezing my butt, squeezing my abs, and I have now worked these muscles rather than these ones. So I hope this video was useful to someone who has a hard time with rounding their back or arching their back in deadlifts. Maybe you do squats and deadlifts and things like that, and you afterward you're like, my low back's tight. I kind of felt that in here. This is a visualization of what is happening with you. I want you to think, stack the cylinders, right? So that straight line through here and here is what we're looking for. That's where we're gonna be our strongest. That's where you're gonna engage your hamstrings and glutes the most, and you're not gonna feel as much tension in those low back muscles after that's set. If you haven't already, start working on some diaphragmatic breathing. So that's learning to use those deep breathing muscles in your belly and your midsection to help pull more air in to create more pressure down there, and learn to engage your core and get yourself into this posterior pelvic tilt position where we're taking the Instagram butt girl stance. Let me see if I can set my phone up and demonstrate this so you guys understand what I'm talking about. Going from anterior pelvic tilt, low back arch, butt out, tension in the hamstrings here, not good tension, and the front of the hips pulled down, and we want to do this. So I would say, think like a dog tucking its tail between its legs. We're going from here to here. When I do that, I can feel my butt cheeks tighten up. I feel the tension ease up on my low back. And now I have control of that. I can say, okay, I'm in this tilted position, or I'm in my posterior or my backward tilt. Now I can hinge back, reach my butt, keep my core tight. I'm feeling all this tension down here on my hamstrings. and I want to pull with my hamstrings and glutes to come back up to that top. Boom. You can see I'm up and down. I'm not arching the back and rolling the hips forward. I reach back, I pull through, I lock my butt out. Reach back, pull through, lock the butt out. That is your more appropriate hip position for hinges, such as deadlifts, and again, that initial movement in your squat. Let me know in the comments if this is useful for you guys. I really hope it is. Like I said, I think it helped the client that I had in here last night that was having a hard time with it. And yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, just a little over 10 minutes long. But I just want to put some kind of information out there that might help you guys with this, because I always say a hip hinge is not a complicated movement, but it's not an easy movement either. And that's something that I usually have to take a whole lot of time teaching people to do whenever they first come to me, is just learning the proper hip and ab position for a hip hinge. Stack the cylinders, vertically aligned, don't let that top one flare up. Have a good day, guys. We'll talk to you in the next video.